correct? We're waiting to begin our webinar here as we're coming up on time and allowing participants to come in as folks enter. So welcome. This is Dr. Kakaiya, and I am very excited to have all of you here on our webinar. And we look forward to discussing some really good issues as they relate to anxiety and sleep. And we all know that particularly right now through this time of COVID, anxiety is really at an all-time high. And what we're trying to do is really inform each of you as you come through learning about neurofeedback, about ways in which we can truly serve that brain well as we progress through life over here. So my name is Dr. Kakaiya, and I'm a psychologist who is also a neuroscientist. And I'll tell you a little bit about what brought me into the world of neurofeedback. And I'll share a little bit of my personal story. I'll walk you through how I came into the world of neurofeedback and what an amazing, powerful technology we have here. So I've been in the world of talk therapy for a very, very long time. And now for me, what's really important is what it is that we're able to do with the brain in a very non-medication way. So that's really like my big passion is about that. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm a school consultant. I go to lots of schools and I do webinars in schools or presentations. And I also excited to share that my book first came out. My first book has come out and it's called Healthy Within. If you look for it under my name, you should be able to find that. So I'm thrilled now to be an author as well. It's kind of like exciting. So let's dive into the topic. Also, please know that if you have questions coming up, feel free to share, ask them, and I'll do my very best to answer your questions as they come up for you. And also at the end of the webinar, you'll see my email address there too, as well as here. So feel free to contact me by email if you have questions that came up, because it is, while in some ways it may sound like it's a simple technology, there's a lot of complexity to it as well. So we just want to be able to have you fully grasp the way in which your brain can be regulated. Thank you. So my next slide here is what I'm trying to come to. And so just a little bit about my biases. I think it's only been like maybe more so in graduate programs, like in the last 10 years or so, that graduate students are learning about neurofeedback. And they actually learn very little about neurofeedback. They learn more about biofeedback. So when I was in grad school, there was nothing that was taught to me about neurofeedback. So ways of regulating the brain, most of what I had through my doctoral program came from talk therapy, basically being able to work with the mind in order to bring about changes in the brain. What occurred for me kind of sort of very simultaneously and in a very synergistic way is that I was in a postdoctoral program for psychopharmacology. So I was kind of like crossing over to what I call the dark side a little bit now, to where I was preparing to get myself trained to be able to do prescriptions for psychiatric medications. And as I went through my 2.5 years of my postdoctoral degree, what I realized again and again, because I've always had a very integrative perspective in how I work with my patients. And I just knew that the side effects we have from these medications were just very, very alarming. And it was something that I just wanted to get away from as much as possible. So when I did that program, actually that program ended up making me make a U-turn into the world of integrative psychology. So I had some classes on supplements and a whole bunch of different things, and I just got way more fascinated with that. The synergistic thing that was happening at the time is my son was in sixth grade, and I'd known from a very young age that he has inattentive ADD. So I had a feeling that we were going to have some challenges as we come through middle school and high school. And sure enough, it began to show up then. And I decided that what I wanted to do was look for ways in which to regulate his brain where it didn't involve putting him on Adderall or any medications or anything like that. So I stumbled across neurofeedback from a colleague who was doing it on her children and just like raving about it. So as I was completing my postdoctoral degree, learning about all the damage that happens to the brain with all these medications that we just get put on like in a split second, I was also having my son's brain retrained for him to be able to start focusing better. And lo and behold, huge shift with him. His bless his heart, graduating from Berkeley as we speak right now, with so much loss with everything that's going on with COVID, which is like, very devastating for so many of us. So our perspective has always been here at Healthy Within. We work very much in kind of working with the whole person as opposed to just one part of you. And then as we work with the whole person, what we want to talk about is we talk a lot about your lifestyle. We talk about the nutrition, what you're eating. And because some of the conferences I go to are integrative medicine for mental health, there's a lot of very current knowledge and skills that I learn about ways in which we can regulate the brain without putting Prozac in it or Lexapro or Adderall or something like that. So there's so much available out there. I'm sure most of you folks know that there's only 2 countries in the world where psychiatric medications or all medications are advertised to the public, and that's the United States and New Zealand. There's 2 countries where we as the consumers receive all these ads on television all the time about, oh, do you have this symptom? Why don't you talk to your doctor about this? So what happens is that physicians really get frustrated with this because they'll have patients who come to them and say, well, I want to be on this medication because I think I have this, this, and this. And so Big Pharma has done an amazing job of making sure that we all feel like we need it. And what I want all of you to know and understand as you finish this webinar with me today, that your brain can be a very powerful self-healing organ, provided you give it the most optimum conditions. So you'll hear me talk about brain training as one optimum condition, but I'll also be talking about a bunch of other things that we can do for brain wellness. So that's really what I'm hoping you'll come away learning today, are all of these other ways in which you can have a brain that's well balanced. I think also another thing that's going on for us is that we really have, and again, I shall make zero judgment about the fact that everybody's families got over dependent on technology in these last 3 months since COVID hit. So this is something that is very much an anomaly. And in fact, it's so funny because most of my patients know me. And whenever I do presentations, I talk a lot about the impact that being on screens so much is having on people. And so my push has always been fewer screens. And so then when COVID hit and my patients were hearing me say, back off. If your kids are going to game, let them game. They need something right now because they've lost so much. So I think, again, we have to have that flexibility depending on what's going on in our current situation. But overall, I think one of the better gifts that could have come out of COVID for so many of our families is the fact that people were connecting with each other, talking with each other. Yes, we are also hearing stories of how how sick and tired people got of being around each other in families, right? But there is a shift that happened towards a different connection. And I hope and pray that we can hold on to like a little bit of it as we move on. So that's really, really, we want to be able to create some sustainability with that. So get to my next slide over here. Get to my next slide. Something seems to be happening here. Click on what? On the screen. Oh, click on the screen. Oh, there you go. Ah, there you go. Ah, hello. Thank you. I have Tracy here helping me out. So what would I do without her? So I thought what I'll do is I'll talk about, really, many of you may not have heard about neurofeedback, like what is neurofeedback? So the simplest way to think about neurofeedback, and this is, we usually, the little girl is sitting there with something on her lap. Our systems are such that there is a big screen in front of you. So basically, you want to think about neurofeedback. The simplest way to think about neurofeedback is physical therapy for your brain. What we're doing is we're having your brain exercise different parts of the brain. So where we place these sensors, like you see on her face, you see some of those sensors, where we place those sensors are specific regions of the brain that we're going to be working on. So as I'll go through some of my subsequent slides, you will see what regions of the brain we work on. And we do a very, very thorough assessment at the outset where we get a really good sense of which regions of the brain we're going to be working on. And that's the extensive training that we all have to have for that. So think about it as brain optimization. Think about it as physical therapy for the brain. Another word that a lot of people will often use is neurotherapy. So frequently we use that as a word as well. So as you see, we place sensors in different regions of the brain. The brain, through the software that we have, the brain waves are displayed on our computer. So I can see what your EEG is on my computer, and what we're able to tell based on the regions where we place those sensors as to what the dysregulations are in those regions of the brain. My software picks up on that. And then what happens for you is that when you produce the kind of brainwave we want you to produce in that region, if you're watching a movie, then your screen clears out. Or the box, if you're not in the region, the box gets very small. So it's a kind of operant reward, if you want to think about it that way. So when you are taking your brain, the most confusing part for a lot of people is they think they are making their brain work. Once the brain latches on, the brain is actually observing itself, and the brain wants to be in its most optimum state. So the brain does the work. So that's why a lot of my kiddos and adults as well will be watching a video. You could watch any TV show, and your brain is doing the work, because the brain is observing itself, and the brain is taking itself to where we want it to go based on what I set on my software. I hope that makes sense. That's one of the parts that's very difficult for people to understand. And then what happens in neurofeedback is as soon as patients get to a place where they quit trying to figure out what's going on and they just let the brain begin to do the work, then the brain starts to do the work. So it's very exciting when somebody can kind of surrender that. So you can see, usually this is how we sit, and obviously now post-COVID, usually I'm not this close to my patients, I'm a little bit farther away, but we have made extra accommodations to be able to make sure that myself, my patients, my staff, we've got all more than the CDC guidelines in terms of patients being able to come into our space and feel safe and taken care of, because we're doing a lot of antiseptic measures and things like that. But as you see, the child is instructed or the adult is instructed to do a certain something. And when they do, so for example, I had a patient today that was her first session. So basically what I asked her to do is that her goal needs to be able to get the monkey to buzz. So usually there's a monkey on your lap. And so And what I said to her is that the monkey tends to buzz when your spaceship goes fast. So she connected the dots on the fact that, oh, I want the monkey to buzz. So her brain then begins to want the monkey to buzz, and it'll do what it needs to do. So that's that reinforcement that it has. So really think about neurofeedback as brain exercise. Best way to think about it is, so here's the thing. What I have done is I don't only treat brains that are not well here in our center. I have so many people that come to us that are coming because they already have a pretty well brain, but they just know that if they exercise their brain, we don't always go to the gym or the yoga studio. Many of us go for wellness just to improve the strength of our body. So we have many people who come to us who have no brain conditions of any sort. And I often will not talk about mental health conditions. You'll hear me often talk about brain health conditions. So that's very much one of my commitments to our field, is to really destigmatize mental illness. And one of the ways we do that is we talk about brain health versus mental health, because there's just so much stigma. And the brain is an organ. And look, when we put it on that little bicycle thing and we make it exercise, it's going to serve you that much better. Where did my, seems like I lost it here again. Bear with me for a second here. I am trying to see what it's trying to do. The mouse has disappeared over there. Sorry about that, folks. My mouse likes to disappear someplace. There we go. Okay. So what we found is that hold on one second. All right. So when we talk about the working of the brain, what is very important, I apologize about that. What's really important as we talk about the working of the brain is to understand some core basic brain, kind of what I call brain 101. And to think about how this brain that we have, this little beautiful 3.5-pound organ that we have, is the only brain we're going to have for the rest of our lives. So I always teach any of my folks that are coming to me to make sure that we look after that brain, because your brain is literally the CEO of your body. So you want to be able to look after that brain and know that the brain is really the seat of our emotions, and that all of the working of the brain is driven through the health of the brain. So the healthier we keep the brain, the better off we are just in life, in terms of sleep, in terms of how we kind of approach things that are going on in our world. So a few brain concepts I like to talk about, which I think it's a lot of times we don't hear about this as much, is there's a concept that we began to discuss probably about 12 years ago or so, and that's called neuroplasticity of the brain. So what you want to think about when you think about the brain being neuroplastic is, we used to think that, once children are 5 or 7 years old, then what happens is that, their brain is kind of preset, or teenage years, and then that's the brain they're going to have for the rest of our life. Not true at all, because the brain, even at age 99.9, the brain is very capable of change. So this is really good news for us in the brain world, in terms of the actions and the steps and the behaviors you do on a daily basis have a significant impact on you, in that they allow your brain to remain really strong and healthy. There's a region in the back of the brain called hippocampus. The hippocampus is where new brain cells are born in the brain, and neuroplasticity is that part of you where we know now that the brain is constantly producing new cells depending on what we expose it to. So the sleep we have and all of that, those are really important wellness traits. The insula is another region of the brain that I like people to make friends with. And that insula is the region of the brain right above the right ear here in this region. And what that is the seat. It's sort of like where feelings and emotions connect. And it's the seat of empathy. So what we have found, there's a lot of research that has been done with meditation. What researchers have found is that when people meditate regularly for like a half an hour every day, that region of the insula becomes more dense, more gray matter in there. The more gray matter we have in the brain, the stronger the brain is. So when we meditate, we are actually changing the structure of the brain. So that's something I want everybody to really kind of take in today. And when I say meditate, it could be 5 to 7 minutes of meditation a day. It doesn't have to be the full 20, the full 30. We like it if you can go a little bit longer. But again, the brain is a muscle. Until you stretch it enough, then the brain is capable of going longer and longer periods for meditation. Sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, that's kind of like, those are our nervous systems that are the fight or flight. And our world globally, because of COVID, our sympathetic nervous system is extremely overactivated right now, right? Does that make sense to everybody, I would imagine, right? We're all in this fear mode right now where we don't know, everything is very unpredictable. It's very difficult when we have so much unpredictability in our world. So your sympathetic nervous system is very aroused right now. And what we want to do is we want to start bringing about calm. And neurofeedback is definitely one of the ways we calm down that sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system is a nervous system that comes about when we breathe, when we meditate, when we do neurofeedback, anytime we do acts of service, when we go serve a community. I'm a very active Rotarian, so my Rotary world is like my huge world. The joy and the sweetness and the simplicity and just the joy, the bliss that one feels when one gives, that is activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So any of those things we do, that's breath, that's meditation, good sleep, all of that calms our nervous system down. And we know that in the brain, another piece that I always love to tell people about is that half an hour, in our DNA, like that double helix, in that DNA, at the tail end of the DNA, we have these pieces called telomeres, Telomeres. The telomeres are the tail end of the DNA. When we have a lot of stress and anxiety and depression and trauma in our world, then the telomeres tend to get shortened. Shortened telomeres also tend to be implicated when people have chronic health conditions like cancer or heart disease or different things like that. There's so much research that has been done that shows that 6 weeks of meditation, 30 minutes a day, increases the length of the telomeres. You want long telomeres because then that means you build your immunity. So in this time when we're so fearful about catching the virus, meditation would be one way in which you increase the length of your telomere. And what it also does is it makes you get healthier overall in your body. So that's another brain concept. I don't have it on my slide, but I just thought it was very important to explain that because this is a really good time. And of course, that's a huge part of what we do with neurofeedback is we calm down that highly aroused sympathetic nervous system so that the brain can start to heal itself. When folks come for treatment here, one of the things we talk a lot about is the kind of like the difference between the mind and the brain, and to be able to separate out that what we're doing with neurofeedback is we're working on the organ, the brain, and the mind is that part of you that's your wishes, your drives, your desires, your intentions, your spirituality, all of that is your mind. So we're very much a brain health center that really likes to make sure you're incorporating mind concepts into your health and wellness as well. There we go. Okay. So think about, and the way neurofeedback works really is that it so one of the easier ways to think about neurofeedback, what we're doing with neurofeedback is we're changing the electrical firing patterns in the brain. Okay, what we're doing is we're changing. So what medications do, like psychiatric medications, depression medications, anxiety medications, if this is your one neuron that meets the other neurons through the synapses and you've got the synaptic cleft in between, medications are poured into the synaptic cleft. So it's the neuronal firing that change, that you have more of the actual neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft. What we do with neurofeedback is the firing that happens in the neuron as it communicates with the other neuron, we change that firing pattern. So we're teaching the brain to teach itself to fire that electrical activity in a way in which it can regulate itself. So when we change the rate of the firing of the brainwave patterns in the brain, we're changing the actual structure of the brain. So imagine how incredible that is. So when we think about the brain, the regions, you can see that pink area there is your frontal lobe, which is your thinking, planning. I often call that like your upstairs brain. And then in the region back over here is your parietal lobe, which is involved with perception, object recognition, knowing numbers, processing issues. So a lot of times if I have dyslexia that I'm treating and things like that, it's usually in the parietal lobe. Our occipital lobe is the lobe in the back over here. And that is the lobe that is visual processing. So oftentimes when I treat people here who've had concussions, so they may have fallen and hit the back of their head, but what happens with the brain is when it's hit in the back, it also the front gets hit. So you often have frontal lobe damage as well as occipital lobe damage. So visually they'll feel impaired, they'll have struggles with balance and things like that. So what we're doing with the neurofeedback is all of those, think about the neurons being all jumbled up and jangled up. What we do is we get them to get sorted out and become more efficient in their firing. Temporal lobe is a very significant area of treatment for us in neurofeedback, and this is the part that's memory related. This is where we understand language, facial recognition. Temporal lobe is also related to speech and emotions. So then we'll work in those regions. Now, cerebellum is in the back over here, and that's fine, gross and fine motor skills. So we'll go to those areas, particularly if we have motor skills issues. And then we know that our brainstem way back there, that if anybody has a severe accident where they have spinal cord injury, it's usually the cerebellum, the brainstem, that's been affected. So that's a very significant part of the brain for us. So switching over to the issues that we treat, sleep is, in fact, what happens is a lot of times when anybody comes for neurofeedback to us, one of the first things I'll share with my patients is, yes, we're working on that. And as a result of us working on that, what's going to happen is that your sleep is going to get very positively affected, because no matter what regions of the brain we're working on, sleep improvement happens just automatically by what we're doing with neurofeedback. So we treat insomnia. We treat people who really have difficulty getting to bed and being able to calm themselves down enough to be able to fall asleep. We have a lot of folks that we treat that wake up panicky in the middle of the night. I've treated quite a few kiddos who have night terrors. We have people who come to us that have restless leg syndrome. So I work with a lot of folks where they feel like they sleep enough, but they don't wake up rested in the morning. So again, neurofeedback shifts that around. Many of my patients come to us because they're grinding their teeth. And I guarantee you, these last 3 months, everybody's been grinding their teeth a lot, because we're just processing so much, and there's just so much going on in our world that it's very hard for us. So I've had a number of patients that came in for other issues, and then their wives or their spouses come in and they're like, Dr. Kakaiya, how could it be that he stopped snoring? Like, have you been working on him stopping to snore? I said, no, we're working on other sleep issues. And typically what happens in sleep is when we're switching from one sleep cycle to another sleep cycle, what can often happen is that as we're switching from one to another, that's if the brain does not shift from one sleep cycle to another in a more efficient way, that's when we end up having sleep issues. So what neurofeedback will do is it's going to allow you to get more regulated with your sleep, and therefore you'll have I always pre-warn my patients when we start neurofeedback that I be prepared for really gnarly dreams. And people have intense dreams, the dreaming. And many of my patients will say to me, I don't even remember dreaming. And that's how inefficient the sleep is. So we are able to make the sleep that much more efficient, and therefore the whole body becomes that much more efficient. So we treat, and why, and so what happens with the reason why we have sleep issues and the reason why neurofeedback is so successful with sleep issues, excuse me, the reason why neurofeedback is so successful with sleep issues is that for people, either the brain is under aroused or it's over aroused. So what we do with neurofeedback is we adjust that arousal and bring it to like a normal state so that the person is able to sleep well, wake up rested, dream enough. There's such an exciting part of the sleep cycle that's called the lymphatic system. Just kind of like how we have the lymphatic system for cleaning the toxins from our body. When we sleep at night, what happens is that the cerebrospinal fluid flushes in through the brain and goes through the entire brain and flushes out through the spinal column. When we dream, our neurons shrink, and so more of the fluid can come in and really flush the brain out. So sleep is very essential because it helps us flush toxins from our body. So that's one of the big reasons why I am such a big about sleep, because that is what really, we know there's a lot of research that shows that people who tend to develop Alzheimer's have had very short sleep cycles or very dysregulated sleep patterns. So we know that if the brain is not getting cleansed enough, then we build those proteins called the tau proteins that increase in the brain, and the side effect of that would be the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So we want to be flushing that brain out. And stress and anxiety, all the work like I do in the daytime, that is all adding a toxic load to my brain. So when I sleep good tonight, my brain is flushing all that out. So I want to be able to give my body the gift of like good sleep. So what we're doing with the EEG is actually what we read on our system here is your EEG. And what that is those are the brain waves that are actually driving the neurons in the brain. When our EEG changes, that's when we have changes in behavior, in attention, in mood, in our feeling states, in our ability to remain calm, to reduce our anxiety, to be able to sleep, to think more clearly, to wake up rested. And what we've found is that I'll often tell my patients that anxiety and panic attacks actually are some of the easier conditions for us to treat here with neurofeedback. We treat a lot of complex conditions, but those are easier ones for us to treat. And really anxiety, a lot of people with performance anxiety have come to us. I've had patients who've just really, I have patients who yell at me because they didn't come here in order to get off their weed or anything like that. But when we've calmed down the anxiety enough, they don't feel a need to use. And then they're like, Dr. K, I didn't come in here for me to stop smoking weed. Come on now, I need to be able to go back to that. I'm like, I'm sorry, your brain's changing. Your brain does not want the weed anymore. I'm sorry. So that's a nice thing that I can feel very apologetic about. So here's how the EEG kind of shows up. And what the EEGs do is it detects the abnormalities in the gene activity in the brain. And and with neurofeedback, what we do is we're increasing the synchronicity of the brain activity. So the more we make it synchronous, the more we make the brain kind of align itself with all the different brain waves, then that's a highly functional brain. Like when I'm doing my neurofeedback and I can see brains that are very dysregulated and brains that come in that are really well regulated, there's a real distinct piece we see with the EEG. So so what neurofeedback really does is it improves your brain function. It improves the operating of your brain. And when your brain begins to operate more optimally, then what's going to happen is that you're going to start to feel better. So remember, what we're doing with neurofeedback is we're changing the neuronal firing patterns. When those firing patterns change, and we improve the communication between the two sides. So for example, when I'm doing T3, T4 on somebody, for example, that site that I'll do is helping this region of the brain speak more efficiently to this region of the brain. So we're helping the brain communicate much more better internally within itself. And what we have found, there's a lot of research. And by the way, there are about probably 1,500 articles with research on neurofeedback. So if any of you want any research articles, please feel free to send me an email and I'll be happy to send you the articles. And what we find is that ADHD, depression, anxiety are really timing issues in the cortical firing of the brain. So the cortex is the outside region of the brain. That ADHD, depression, and anxiety, those three conditions, we've got a lot of research that shows that it's the way the neurons are firing. And when we change the firing patterns of the neuron, then you feel better. Depression improves, anxiety improves, ADHD improves. So we've had a lot of success with that. So here's what the normal brainwave patterns tend to look like. If this is like, calm and alert, this is you're awake and you're resting, kind of like a loose focus you have. This is what sleepy waves look like. And then these are our deep brain waves, the delta brain waves. And what's really interesting is that when we have a lot of delta in an awake brain, that's going to be a brain that's going to have a lot of dysfunction in it. So our goal usually tends to be to optimize the beta brainwave patterns. And by the way, meditation also improves the firing of these brainwave patterns. So that's why you'll find me coming. In fact, I often, when my patients finish neurofeedback with me over here, I tell them that their aftercare from the treatment here is for them to do continuous meditation. And what's happened is we've improved the efficiency of the brain so much that if a person has tried all their life to meditate and they're not able to, after they've done about 30, 35 sessions of neurofeedback, they can actually dip into a meditation. They're able to do the meditation. So these are our different brainwave patterns in the brain that we're observing, monitoring, and readjusting. So again, when we get these spindles, these alpha spindles are beautiful because that's like that calm and alert. And that's like when you're dipping into that really nice meditative state. I mean, I can usually tell. And my patients will be sitting here and I can see on my screen when they're throwing out these, what we call these alpha spindles. And they'll have this amazing, like blissful, calm state, which is very joyful to observe. So again, here are the functions. So in our brain, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different types of brain waves. And each one serves a very specific purpose in the brain. So you've got your SMR that's related to, am I ready to go? I'm ready. Your beta is the one that's associated with focus and attention. Your high beta is that, like right now with me doing this presentation, I guarantee you my high beta brainwaves would be like this because I'm excited to be able to do this and to share my knowledge that I feel so passionate about with all of you. And then your alpha brainwaves are where you have that deep internal locus what we have found, there's a marker in the brain for ADHD where we have a lot of alpha brainwave patterns and alpha and delta. So we really try to reduce those and increase the high beta and the SMR. So you can see that when we go in there and we modify those top three in a brain that tends to be inattentive or easily distracted, that's where that brainwave activity comes in. Theta is like internal locus, deep thought, deep sleep, so delta. And then gamma is the one it's our aha. Like, when we're in the shower and the water is running on us and you suddenly get these big aha moments, those are your gamma brainwaves that are at play there. They're beautiful. So what we do is, how it works is, as I mentioned to you before, the brain waves that are inconsistent, we work on making them consistent. The brain that might be underactive, we want to wake it up. The brain that might be too sleepy, we want to wake that brain up. The brain that's too over aroused, we want to calm that brain down. So that's all of what we do with neurofeedback. So again, keep in mind, and I keep emphasizing this point because this is where the technology comes in, that what's happening is when we change the rate of our brainwave firing, that changes the arousal of the brain, and then it shifts and it nudges the brain to a more optimum level of functioning. That's where neurofeedback is so powerful. What it does is it really helps improve cognition, your flexibility. It helps sleep. I've seen, amazing changes with memory. So you may just be coming to me for sleep or anxiety, but you're going to feel a benefit in all these areas that you see on your screen right now. So it's just fantastic how when we improve one region of the brain, the rest of the brain, because of neuroplasticity, the rest of the brain kind of follows suit as well. So it's very, very empowering in terms of what it does. And you can see that we treat a ton of brain conditions. And to me, these are all brain conditions, PTSD. And I'm sort of worried, and I am going to do a webinar about PTSD and neurofeedback. So definitely be looking for that. I'll be definitely doing more webinars because I really want I want to be able to do more work around how neurofeedback can help that PTSD brain right now. I want us to be able to calm down some of that anxiety. I want us to be able to get into this next phase of us opening up, and that next phase in a way in which we can do it with mindfulness and care for this beautiful organ that we have in our body. And I think it might not be a surprise to you that one of my biggest pet peeves is how over-medicated we are as a country. And what I really worry about are the metabolic issues that show up as a result of people being put on medications by family medicine doctors who have not had psychiatry training. And there's so much that can be done. So I have a very big passion. In fact, one of the big things that I have done currently, just because of how important it is for me to be able to get this word out in the world globally and in the nation, is, we've established an aspect of my business where what we're going to do is we're going to be selling healthy within franchises that can go into a lot of communities so that families know that there's an option to big pharma, that healthy within is committed to teaching you how to coach your brain to bring it to that optimum place. So I'm very excited. I have amazing business partners that I'm working with, and I'm very excited about this next phase of what I want to do. I understand that I'm tackling oh my God, a multi-gazillion dollar industry. Okay, big pharma, it's huge. So, however, a lot of people don't even know about neurofeedback. So that's one of the big things that I want to make sure we change. So athletes, oh my goodness, my athletes, they're well-brained. They love coming for neurofeedback because they know I work with CEOs, that a lot of people who want that peak performance where their brain is already in a really good state, but they know that there's a little bit of impatience they have with themselves. There's a little bit of this extra self-criticalness, especially if you look at the Enneagram, there might be a 1, they're always hard on themselves. So what happens is we need to be able to have that brain serve us the way we want it to. Like, and that's why a lot of athletes will often come to us. I've treated a lot of concussions, lots of brain injuries. So obviously, you know, when you've had head injury, we really want to work with that too. So in my mind, what I hope that everybody's sort of getting today is that this lovely organ we have in our body, our brain, it is very self-healing if we give it the right food. And I'm not just talking about food per se, like as, you know, food that we eat, but I'm talking about food such as meditation. I'm talking about food such as nature. I'm talking about food such as laughter, you know, things like exercise. So these are all when we breathe, when you do acupuncture, when we sleep well, when we have laughter and we have boredom. I think one of the best food that we can give the brain, believe it or not, is boredom. So think about that. Boredom is very important because the seat of creativity is really boredom. So we want to be able to give the brain lots of good nutrients. You want to give it the greens, the omega-3s. The important thing to remember about vitamin D, because I have that on my slide over there, is that vitamin D is actually a hormone. It's not a vitamin. It's a hormone that is actually the master hormone over all the hormones in the body. So we know that oftentimes low vitamin D levels are implicated in depression. They're implicated in anxiety. They're implicated when somebody's got sleep issues. One of the first things I'm going to do is want their doctor to check their vitamin D levels. And I'm a big believer of people taking their vitamin D levels as high as 80. When you go see your doctor, and if your vitamin D levels are like around 32, 34, something like that, your doctors will say, oh, you've got good vitamin D levels, okay? As an integrative psychologist who has really learned a lot, we also know, by the way, there's a lot of studies that came out just last week that there was a big significant study that was in the Journal of American Medicine that showed that people who had high levels of vitamin D were resistant to the coronavirus. So vitamin D is that molecule that is our friend. And yes, if we don't get it in the sun, through the sun, let's go ahead and get it through the supplement. It's really okay. And I usually tell people to do your D3 with a K. When you combine it with a K, then it's better absorbed. So that's something very important to kind of keep in mind and really be looking at your food sources and make sure that they're clean. So vitamin D, think of it as a master hormone that controls the rest of your body. And then when you give your brain the breath, you give it good food, you give it good exercise. By the way, the reason I talk so much about exercise in most of my presentations and with my patients here is that new neurons, when we exercise regularly, vigorous exercise, that hippocampus that I talked about earlier on, new neurons are born through consistent regular exercise. So we keep our brain young by exercising regularly. The other thing that helps grow the brain in a good place are things like foods like berries, walnuts, fish, like your omega-3s, nuts. All of those are foods that increase a molecule in the brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF, the higher levels we have of BDNF in the brain, the healthier brain tends to be, because that's brain fertilizer. So anything we can do, probiotics are very good. I don't have probiotics here, but probiotics are very good because there's that whole gut-brain connection. So we talk about nutrition, do your yoga, your meditation, your food. I like using, many of my patients use this technology called Alpha Stim. That's really good. Massage is very good. Acupuncture is very good for wellness. So we really want to take care of our body in all ways. So what I'd like to do is just kind of finish up here with giving you a few resources. Now, what I didn't put on this is my book, which has come out. So if you go to my website, healthywithin.com, you'll see a link on that to be able to order my book. It's available through Amazon, so you can get it. And it's also available as a Kindle book. For those of you that like to read Kindle, it's available as a Kindle book. There are lots of really good YouTube videos about neurofeedback. So feel free to read those. I think a lot of people are skeptics about this. They are like, this sounds too good to be true. So oftentimes you can have that attitude. And I would say, by all means, Google negative effects of neurofeedback. I think the thing that you'll see when you read any folks that have had negative experiences with neurofeedback might be practitioners who just kind of somehow figured out a way to get a hold of a machine. The amount of training I have done in order to be a qualified neurofeedback practitioner, as I am right now, is very extensive. So folks who may have had negative experiences with neurofeedback might be people that are not trained properly. So that's one of the reasons why with this offering I'm doing with my business, I'm going to be extremely picky about who takes it on and who they hire to do the neurofeedback and what kind of training that they get, because I really believe that we need to do well by our clients, our patients, and really make sure that we take that ethical step of getting ourselves as qualified as we can. I mean, it's kind of dangerous for me because when I go to my neurofeedback conferences, there's like all kinds of technology and gadgets that are out there. And then I come back buying like a new machine. So currently I have 5 machines over here and we just love doing what we do. And all of my staff who work for me here, they come to work feeling really good about what it is that we do here and the difference that we make with our patients. And mind you, I am still a little bit in the world of talk therapy. And I was in that world for over 25 years, 27 years before I shifted to neurofeedback in the last decade, 10, 11 years. And I can honestly tell you that my patients who receive neurofeedback get better. They get better, they stay better, because once I have nudged the brain to go do what I want it to do, then the brain takes over. It's like once somebody learns how to ride a bicycle, they never forget how to ride that bicycle. So neurofeedback is a brain skill that you get taught, that your brain gets taught, and then your brain runs with it and goes, takes it even farther than what we might have done in the care over here. So it's a very gratifying field to be in. It's a very exciting field to be in, just because there's just so much innovation, good new stuff that's coming out. But also keep in mind, this has been a field that has been around for close to 40 years. And isn't it interesting that big pharma, because they're so big, and we're not big like that, so we're not able to hit the airwaves with all this stuff. So here's a field that has a lot of research in it, that has been around for 40 years, that's a solid quality way in which to regulate any brain condition. You saw how many brain conditions we can treat, and then we do that without any side effects. I think the worst side effect that any of my patients might have ever had might have been a headache. And other than that, if you have a very qualified clinician who's doing the neurofeedback, chances are you just gave your brain the biggest gift you could ever give it. And then your brain is going to serve you for the rest of its time with you. So I hope that this webinar was useful for you. I hope you learned a few exciting things about this beautiful 3.5-pound organ we have between our brain. And just know that I'm going to be doing webinars very consistently, and we'll send out emails. And I hope that if you have any questions, feel free to email them to me. And thank you very much. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of the week. Take care. Bye-bye.